The great pleasures of my work on the Great Lakes has been the opportunity to meet, learn about, and work with Métis people in Ontario. I'm pleased, therefore, to welcome Chair France Picotte to the Great Lakes Public Forum. Chair Picotte was named Chair of the Métis Nation of Ontario in 2008. She is a Métis citizen and travels across the country raising awareness about the Métis people and Métis culture in Ontario. Chair Picotte received the Ontario Heritage Trust Award for her dedication to preserving the Michif language and the traditional finger weaving practice of the Métis people. She will share a Métis perspective on the Great Lakes. Chair Picotte.
Hey, bonjour, je m'appelle France Picotte, je viens du nord de l'Ontario. Je suis métisse du nord de l'Ontario. Je suis bien contente de voir tout le monde ici puis de parler avec vous autres des Grands Lacs. So my name is France Picotte. I'm a Métis woman from northern Ontario. And I'm very happy to be here on the traditional lands of the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nations and of the Toronto York Durham Métis Council. I think it's important to acknowledge both territories. Our president, Margaret Froh, sends her regrets. She is on a family event, and we all know how family is important out of the country. So I bring her her good wishes also, and to make sure that everybody knows that this is close to our hearts. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Métis, and just so that you understand a little bit why we have such a close affinity and a close tie to the waters and to the Great Lakes. So, if you've had a chance to go to the booth or not, you can see a little bit of who we are, a few little things, and you'll also see one of our dialects in Michif. We're now doing a project where we are rehabilitating, recapturing, and promoting our language. This is only one dialect. We've got a 5-year project going. And by the way, I speak English, French, and Michif, and I often speak all three of them in the same sentence. So I know what I'm saying. I hope eventually you do. And if you don't, just ask questions because I'm used to that. One of the things that we are, first of all, is we are an Indigenous person, Indigenous nation. We have equal rights, but different than the First Nations and the Inuit. We're protected in the Constitution, Section 35. Now, that's all the legal things that we've done. But what we also are a nation, a very proud nation, that has worked, used, and protected the lands and the waters forever. We govern ourselves in a traditional way and in a more modern way. But what we've done is we've drafted our Statement of Prime Purpose. And a Statement of Prime Purpose, you can go online and look at it, www.metisnation.org, dictates our core values. And the one that I'm going to read to you is one of our core values is to protect and preserve the land and waters within our homelands for future generations. I think it's very important. Everything we do is not for us personally, it's for the future generations to come. So we talk about what can be done so that my grandchildren, and I'm being very selfish, my grandchildren, their grandchildren, and their grandchildren can exercise their rights as Métis, can live and celebrate their culture as Métis. So that's very important. So the Métis people are distinct people. We emerged from the fur trade, and we have distinct Métis settlements as an outgrowth of the fur trade along the freighting waterways and watersheds in Ontario. These settlements were part of a larger regional community interconnected by highly mobile lifestyle of the Métis, the fur trade network, seasonal rounds, extensive kinships, connection, and shared collective history and identity. We're a very mobile people, very mobile. It wasn't uncommon for our fathers, or Métis fathers, to have more than one family along the trade route. It's a fact of life. They did. They had to survive, and that's what they did. So we have an extensive kinship network, all right? And we find, to this day, cousins and uncles that we didn't know existed, but it's part of our survival and it's part of our history. And you know what? It's not something we have to hide anymore. It's part of who we are. For nearly 250 years, from the 17th to the mid-19th century, the fur trade was the vast commercial enterprise across the wild forested expanses of what is today Canada. People in Europe love those top hats, those hats that were made with the short furs of the beaver, and then so therefore the fur trade was very important. The fur trade in the Mattawa, as an example, the fur trade in Mattawa-Nipissing area was part of that larger trade network. One of the primary trade routes in Ontario followed waterways from the Ottawa River at Mattawa through the Nipissing Passageway from Lake Nipissing along the French River into Georgian Bay and west through the North Channel, Lake Huron. And Lake Huron is Lake Huron, because I can't pronounce it in English. The important thing to know is that back then, our highways were the lakes, the rivers, the Great Lakes, and our vehicles were the birch bark canoes, the big canoes we had. And that's what helped form Canada. The Métis were born from and into the fur trade. The growth of the Métis sense of identity was due in large part to the objectives of that economy and resulted in distinct Métis communities being formed along the routes of the fur trade. Today, many of these historic Métis communities continue to exist along the rivers and the lakes where forts and posts were once the hub of fur trade activity in Ontario. We were very prominent along the shores of all the lakes. And even today, our history is still hidden to the fact that just last year we found a cemetery which was unmarked, unknown, a pretty important cemetery along the route, one of the fur trade route, and it's been found to be of mixed ancestry. So it's 2016 today, and we're still finding things about the Métis that are not known. Because we understood both societies, because of course we are born from First Nations women and European fathers that created mixed ancestry children who then intermarried and created the Métis Nation. But because of our origins, we had a foot in each camp and made us understand better each community, each camp, the Europeans and the First Nations. And that allowed us to do a better trading, to be a better trading partner. It also gave us values that were very important, because I always say we took the best values of the First Nations, the best values of the European, and made it our own. So it's a big part of who we are. So it also made us very resilient. The life of Métis men was rigorous. Days were long. Work was extremely hard and always life and death, depending on their skills in the wilderness and on the water. And people will say, well, how did your Métis voyageurs die? What was the biggest cause of death of your Métis voyageurs? And many people think it was drowning. It actually wasn't drowning. It was hernia, but that's not how they call it. But it was because of the workload, the paddling of those canoes, and the portaging of all those packs, that they call it a gut bust, but I think it was a hernia in proper language. And that's what actually was the highest mortality rate for our voyageurs on the water. So this characterization speaks to the Métis spirit and pride of independence. The versatility and ability of Métis women and men to overcome challenging tests of intellect, strength, and endurance during the fur trade contributed to a growing sense of consciousness of what it was to be Métis. That sense of character, combined with a shared Métis history and language, created a sense of nationhood which would ultimately have a significant impact on the development of Canada. And a lot of people today say, well, who are the Métis? How come we haven't really heard about Métis other than Louriel was hung as a traitor? What else? You know, why wouldn't we have heard them? Well, when Louriel was hung as a traitor here in Ontario, it was our government that put the bounty on Louriel's head. It was the government that sent the armies to go and fight with Louriel. So back then, if you were Métis, it wasn't very cool to say, hey, I'm Métis. Because being Métis in Ontario back then made you too French, too Indian, and too Catholic. So therefore, if you could take any ticks off, you did. And our grandparents did that in order to survive so that we could survive and our children could exercise their rights. We went into hiding, but we still exercised our rights. We still held on to our beliefs, our spirituality, our affinity to the land. And all of that was celebrated in a more intimate way than in an open. And to this day, some of our Métis citizens don't want to be publicly identified as Métis because they're afraid they're going to lose their job. And that's a reality, even today. So that's some of the things that we are going through, but it still doesn't change who we are and what we stand for. We have rights. We have Section 35 rights. We have harvesting rights, fishing rights. Along with those rights, we're very strong believers, and we have a harvesting policy that respects the right of the species to exist. We have to take care of our land and our water for our children because nobody else will. Other than maybe here today, I see that there's a lot of work being done. I truly believe that we have to work together in order... Did you give me a 2-minute mark already? They were very happy to keep me on track today. We are also very involved in commercial fishing, and commercial fishing is very important because you know what? We've been commercial fishing for very many generations. So we know intimately those lakes, how they were, how they've changed, and how we can bring them back. We've heard this morning that it's very important to speak to the Indigenous people. It's very important to speak to all 3 Indigenous people, and especially in the Great Lakes. You know, it's very important to speak to the Métis, the First Nations, and the tribes. We have 2 governments. We have 3 different peoples we need to talk to. We need to get together. We need to look at the big picture and do this. In some time in, I'm going to lose the date, so dates to me aren't very important. People ask me how old I am. I says, I don't know. You'll have to calculate it. But anyhow, in I think it was 1871, there was, on the Georgian Bay, there was 13 boats owned by Métis. I think that was very interesting. 13 boats, commercial fishing boats, owned by Métis, as opposed to just 4 boats owned by non-Métis that were doing commercial fishing. So I think you see how long that we've been involved with the lakes and the knowledge that's there in both things. Fishing is still important today because that's how we have our celebrations. We don't have powwows, but we do have get-togethers. We do have fall harvest. And fishing, fish fries are always involved. If you ever have a chance to come to one, please do. The fish is awesome. Our people know how to fix it, how to fish it, how to catch it, how to fish it, how to fillet it and deep fry it and prepare it. It's great. So I think that is something that if you ever have a chance to do, please join the Métis community in celebration, and you'll see, you'll get to live a little bit what the Métis life is all about. As a nation, we realize that our community's health is linked to the health of the environment. That includes the lands and the lakes. So when I say we have to look at the whole picture, I mean the whole picture, not just the animals, the fish, the water. We have to look at the air. We have to look at the people around the lakes to see the health effects it has. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to stop in the fall. And everybody looks at the beautiful sunsets, and they're beautiful. But did you ever stop and smell the wetland in the fall? Did you ever stop? I call them swamps, because that's what I have up north. Did you ever smell a swamp in the fall? You can tell how healthy that swamp or that wetland is by the smell. It's very important to use all your senses and to use everything that you have in order to make an informed decision on how things are going to happen. We still use the Great Lakes. Our youth, every about second or third year, have a big canoe trip. They do a traditional fur trade route. And they spend 90 days on the water in those big canoes. And they live the life that our Métis voyageurs did. They listen to the stories. They listen to what the elders say around the campfire on the edges of those lakes. They paddle those lakes in storms and in calm waters, like our ancestors did. And that, to them, because if you talk, and I said them instead of them, right, is invaluable knowledge that they get because they listen, they hear, they smell, and they feel what it was like and what it will be like for their children and their grandchildren. So I think that my 2 minutes are up because she's looking at me, and I will close by saying I really, really hope that you have a chance to go see our booth and look at our people, but I really hope that we manage to work together, look at the big picture, and make sure that our Great Lakes are protected and brought back to what they were. Thank you.